Well, good afternoon. This is Annette Oso, and I'm going to wait a few minutes here as more people are coming in. We want to welcome you to the second webinar of the 2024 Fall Resiliency Academy series. My name is Annette Oso again. I'm Managing Director for Resilient Virginia. And I want to recognize my colleague, Trish Porter, who worked on planning this event, and Jerry Savenka, who is our technical advisor, who's assisting today. We do have a few logistical notes to go through. First, we are going to be recording the session and sharing it with all of the attendees. You're invited to introduce yourself in the chat box. Attendees will remain on mute during this session. So do add your questions to the Q&A box. We'll be addressing those at the end of the presentation period. Note also the transcription feature is enabled if you choose to use that feature. An added note is that we can provide certificates of attendance for self-reported continuing education credits, if that's applicable for you. And just a few notes here about the Resiliency Academy. Our series, we started this series in 2020 and address a variety of themes every year. This year, we have to say we're doing something extremely relevant given the current disasters. We're working this year on presentations that address the integration of climate impact into hazard mitigation planning. The first session this fall was provided the latest information on climate projections in the Mid-Atlantic based on the newest National Climate Assessment. This set the stage for the next three webinars, today's, which will look at FEMA requirements for including climate in hazard mitigation plans, and then the following two, which will have tools and resources for developing your plan, as well as regional and local examples of hazard mitigation planning that has included climate impact. The agenda for today, as you can see, will have the speakers and, as noted, the question and answer at the end. We also, before we get too far into the agenda, wanted to do a quick poll that will give our presenters an idea of the sectors represented in today's audience. So we'll put the poll up and have 30 seconds on that to respond, if you all could respond to that. Here's the poll. And again, gives us a sense of the type of folks attending, whether you're governmental, community organizations from universities or academia or nonprofits. So please do respond, and we'll do about 30 seconds here on that. There it is. Okay, we have local regional governments, some state government folks, also a fair number from 27% from the private sector, have academic and nonprofit represented also. Before we get started on presentations, we'd like to take a minute to thank our Resiliency Academy sponsor, which is the MRISA, the Mid-Atlantic CAP-RISA program. This program is supporting the spring and fall series this year and is made possible through NOAA funding. In addition, we want to note our annual sponsors, Marion Enterprises, Weston and Sampson, ECT, and Clark Nexon, as well as our members, which are government, institutional, individual members, and our generous sponsors. The support of these folks enables us to provide a wide range of resiliency resources across the state and to convene such events as the Resiliency Academy series, as well as our biennial conference. Now we want to go ahead and introduce our speakers for today. Jeramie Calandro, Emergency Management Specialist with the National Resilience Planning and Analysis Branch of the headquarters FEMA. And we're very happy to bring the headquarters folks in today for a special presentation on the National Resilience Guidance that has recently been published through that agency. Jeramie has over a decade of experience in actually local emergency management, as well as working at the headquarters. And she supports a team that is now applying research, policy, and data skills to develop guidance and resources to work across the nation's resilience efforts. She received her master's from Georgetown University. Next, we'll have Rodney Bahner, a community planner for the Mitigation Division and our Virginia-based office here for FEMA Region 3. He assists Virginia communities with hazard mitigation planning and project implementation through the FEMA integration team. Previously worked again locally on land use planning and historic preservation in West Virginia. He received, his master's degree from University of Oregon. Next, Katie Vugdalic with the State Department of Emergency Management, our State Hazard Mitigation Officer. And we do want to take a minute to say that Katie has come back, has recently been out in the field, and want to thank both VDEM and FEMA personnel for all the work they're doing to help with the recovery response after the recent hurricane. Katie, before starting the role at the state, served as the Operational Recovery Supervisor and Preparedness Grant Administrator for VDEM. She has experience working in nonprofit, private, and public sectors, and has received her bachelor's degree from Virginia Tech. So we're wanting to do one more thing with our audience before we go forward with the presentations. And that is to ask you all to participate in a Mentimeter exercise that looks at what your community currently has in place to withstand another disaster or a disaster. Given particularly what we have just gone through, we felt this was a really relevant quick exercise to do. So if you go to Mentimeter, you can scan the QR code or click the link that's in the chat. And I believe I will now turn this over to Trish Porter to go through this exercise. Right, and Trish has put the link up in the chat. So we're asking you to think about what you currently have in place in your community. Is that perhaps stockpiles of food and water that would be potentially safe, alternative energy sources? Perhaps you've already done some reinforcing of your roads and bridges in your community. So that's the sort of thing. Transportation networks is another one. What kind of alternative transportation or emergency transportation might be available? Some folks have done some modeling, it looks like, and have resilience hubs in place. So that's great. Right. And Trish, we have a few more, we'll do for a few more seconds and go on to kind of part two of this, which is sort of the other side of the coin here. Redundancy, that's a big one there, and modeling and planning, of course. So part two of the Mentimeter exercise would be, what would your community want to have in place to better deal with disasters? So again, if you have not already put in place things like stockpiles or alternative energy or transportation sources, and kind of, so how would you be able to obtain the basic goods and services that are needed, as we're seeing now post-disaster is so important. Disaster training, I feel that's very important, and it is just, it's something that is not only for the disaster specialists, but also for community members. Microgrids, I think that's great. Again, for an alternative energy source that can be operating on its own, disconnected from the regional system. Very good. We really appreciate your thoughts on this. I have a few more minutes here. Communication is a big one. Very good. Thank you so much. We'll go on and want to have Jeramie Calandro proceed ahead and take over the presentation screen now. Thank you, Jeramie.
Thanks, Annette. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jeramie Calandro from FEMA's Office of Resilience Strategy. We also have Kathy Welker on the line as well. She's a project lead for the National Resilience Guidance, which I will be reviewing with you all today. Here is just a quick agenda, very quick, as we only have about 15 minutes to talk about this great guide. I'll be reviewing the National Resilience Guidance, our implementation plans, and the Resilience Resources Gateway. One thing I want to note as we move forward is that this meeting is more climate focused, but the energy is intentionally very broad, with climate being one aspect of resilience. And I'll go into more detail shortly. The QR code you see there is a direct link to our website where you can download the National Resilience Guidance. So please feel free to access that and share amongst your colleagues. We've scheduled these series of energy overview webinars, with our last one actually being tomorrow, October 9th at 3 p.m. You can register for that through our website as well. So for some additional background before we get into the meat of it, the National Resilience Guidance was released August 27th. The energy has been almost a 2-year effort. We've engaged with over 1,000 partners and resilience experts who've informed the development of the energy through reviewing our drafts and participating in various listening sessions. And we would not have been able to get this document out there for everyone to benefit from without those engagements. So next, why a guide for national resilience? Well, FEMA has made resilience a priority. It's the year of resilience at FEMA. Communities today are facing an increasingly complex set of challenges. It's no surprise to anyone here that the severity and the number of natural disasters, like where everyone's experiencing down in Florida right now, pandemics, cyber attacks, infrastructure failures, these shocks are becoming more frequent and intense. And then there are chronic community stressors that we face every day, such as food insecurities, endemic crime, insufficient affordable housing, persistent poverty, that not only make the impacts of those shocks worse, they also undermine our ability to recover from disasters and to thrive day to day. So understanding these challenges and applying a unified whole community approach to addressing them will help strengthen our collective security and resilience so that we can overcome these ever-evolving challenges and thrive as a nation. Providing that understanding is what the NRG sets out to do. Next, we have the vision. The National Resilience Guidance looks to recognize these challenges and promote a common understanding of resilience. It takes a holistic approach, much like the Resilient Virginia approach, to address the physical and socioeconomic challenges of the Commonwealth. This resource is intentionally high level, as I mentioned earlier. It's an umbrella document that offers a unifying approach to increasing resilience that applies across all audiences. This is not just for emergency managers or chief resilience officers. It proposes a common vision of resilience. As you can see listed on the screen, we have a resilient people, a resilient society, a resilient economy, a resilient built environment, a resilient natural environment. Next, the National Resilience Guidance definition and principles. The energy resilience definition is the ability to prepare for threats and hazards, adapt to changing conditions, and withstand and recover rapidly from adverse conditions and disruptions. The 7 foundational principles that set us up for creating a resilient nation is as follows. Resilience is adaptive, collaborative, interdependent, addresses all threats and hazards, including both shocks and stressors. Resilience is human-centered, equitable and just, sustainable, and durable. These are intended to be considered and woven into all the work that we do, all the work that we are already doing, as resilience isn't necessarily another duty assigned, rather a new way of thinking or approaching what you are doing. Next, we have roles, as I mentioned before. The audience for this guidance is intentionally broad and incorporates an interdisciplinary approach. The NRG is intended to help all individuals, communities, and organizations gain a better understanding of what holistic resilience looks like, provides a common approach and steps that can be taken to move resilience forward, and discuss how everyone has a key role in building resilience. Individuals, families, households' role, the community organizations, such as the PTA, non-governmental organizations such as the Red Cross, businesses like your local daycare, and governments at all levels. Our goal for the NRG is that it is not viewed as a FEMA disaster document or guidance that is just for emergency managers, but rather a document developed in collaboration with many partners for use by many partners, because we realize that building resilience cannot be addressed by disaster planning alone. Next, we have our NRG systems. There are many lenses through which we can review resilience. Climate and disaster resilience are probably the most recognized. However, there's many more: economic, health, cultural resilience, etc. For my review of your website, the NRG systems seem similar to the Resilient Virginia main components. The NRG promotes the importance of planning for resilience comprehensively, considering all resilience lenses by taking a systems thinking approach that considers the risk caused by both acute shocks and community stressors, as well as the interconnectedness and interdependencies among those systems. The NRG identifies the 6 interconnected systems that you see on your screen that have a strong connection to the health, safety, well-being, and prosperity of communities and impact on resilience. They are environmental, community and social, economic and financial, housing, governance, and infrastructure system. Next, we're going to briefly talk about how to strengthen resilience from the NRG perspective. In addition to laying out foundational concepts like the principles, roles, and systems, the National Resilience Guidance works to make things actionable. The NRG outlines specific actions people can take to begin or continue their resilience building. Broadly speaking, the NRG covers understanding your shocks and stressors, factoring resilience considerations into your work, and how to develop and implement resilience efforts. We hit on topics such as engaging and organizing people, identifying resilience leaders and champions, building inclusive teams, bringing community voices into the process in a meaningful way. At a high level, the NRG goes into planning approaches, how to use policies to advance resilience, structuring resilience projects and programs, financing resilience efforts, and measuring resilience. Because the NRG is very high level, we're also developing supplemental resources to help people deepen their understanding. A brief overview will be like the Resilience Resource Gateway, which I will touch on shortly, various resilience case studies, and additional guidances that go deeper into the NRG concepts we are reviewing today. The other piece I want to hit on here is the NRG also promotes the idea that social trust and connectedness is a vital part of building resilience and should be considered as an outcome of good resilience planning. The NRG emphasizes the importance of broad and authentic collaboration and engagement, participatory decision-making, transparency, inclusiveness as a way to be effective resilience planning and to build social trust. Next, we have here a resilience maturity model. Please do not strain your eyes and try to read this slide in depth. You can see the maturity model in the NRG on page 33 and 34. The model identifies the key characteristics of resilience-related activities and how communities and organizations can progress from the early stages of starting to think about resilience all the way to fully integrating resilience into all aspects of the community's functions. It describes levels of the community resilience: ad hoc, emerging, enhanced, and integrated. Essentially provides a guide to help communities grow their programs. However, we recognize that communities likely have characteristics of resilience activities and projects across the maturity model versus one column at a time. This goes a little more in depth into the maturity model, which highlights characteristics such as understanding your shocks and stressors, which you see here, systems thinking approach, which is considering interdependencies and approaching planning comprehensively, collaboration, learning how to lead deeper conversations, change the familiar conversations to ones that try to solve the root cause of the problem, focusing on long-term goals and priorities, identifying interdependencies, including those that may not seem obvious, leadership and decision-making, which reflect clear resilience goals and community priorities. Building resilience comes down to a mindset that all planning and well-designed projects and programs can promote resilience, maximize resilience values, and result in co-benefits, which is called the resilience dividend, when resilience principles and concepts are considered in all that we do. All right, next we have our implementation phase. Now that the National Resilience Guidance has been released, we enter the next and perhaps the most important phase, moving towards action. We've begun planning efforts and outreach strategies to operationalize and implement the energy. This is a nationwide effort involving everyone we have the privilege of engaging with, like all of you here today. We will work with agencies, organizations, and SLT partners as we develop this strategy. We don't want this to be a document that just sits on the shelf. We want it to be useful to you all. As I mentioned earlier, we have scheduled a series of overview webinars. Our last one is tomorrow, Wednesday, October 9th at 3 p.m. So please register to get an even more in-depth review than what we're doing here today. It'll also go a little deeper into some of the supplemental materials. More specifically than what I mentioned before, we'll review the Planning for Resilience Quick Guide. There's a Community Engagement Quick Tips, Systems Thinking Guide. These are just some that are also in development. We are also developing case studies with Argonne National Laboratory. Essentially, we did our interviews with states and locals and nonprofits who had wonderful resilience efforts to share to make them more digestible for others to learn from. Some examples are the South Carolina Watershed-Based Resilience Planning Program case study. We are also Green Bay, Wisconsin Green Infrastructure Code Audit. And then lastly, Healthy Williamson County, Texas, had a case study about their community health efforts. Those are just a few. We're always looking for more. We recognize that many great resilience resources already exist, including toolkits, guides, and frameworks. Many of those actually were taken to inform the guidance, and the guidance is not meant to replace any of those pieces. We wanted to share all these amazing resources, so we worked with Argonne again to develop the Resilience Resource Gateway, which is a searchable library that includes a broad range of resilience resources. We will continue to add and update these resources. We are also hoping to partner with folks like you on the development of new materials. So we are very interested in your ideas, what's working for you, what's not, and what you need. Our efforts are also including integrating energy concept into exercises and training, additional guidances, and the national frameworks. Essentially, we are working towards baking resilient concepts into all efforts so it's not looked at as a separate piece of work to do. As we move into the implementation phase of the energy, we're also examining how best to assist our SLT partners. The development of the energy included a year-long effort to socialize it and to hear about some of the challenges and successes people and communities have in their resilience space. So we are asking for you to share. We want to know what exists, what gaps you have, what tools, resources, etc. So we are very much looking forward to this being just the start of our collaboration with you all here. There are many great resilience efforts taking place. So again, please share. Lastly, I just want to touch base on the Resilience Resources Gateway. I mentioned this a few times before. What you see here is just a quick screenshot. You can also access this website through our website and that QR code, which I will share again shortly. You can see right there is the main tile to review some of the case studies we have posted or continuing to post, as well as a number of resources. So please take some time and play on that. Let us know what we need to add and what, so we can share with as many folks as possible. I know that was very, very fast. There was a lot of information to cover, so thank you very much for your time and your patience. Like I mentioned before, we are very much looking forward to this being the start of a great dialogue. So please reach out via our email address, national-resilience@fema.dhs.gov. There's a QR code again. I will make sure Trish and the Resilience Virginia team has some of the links that I mentioned to share around with the group. So that does it for me. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you, Jeramie. We'll just go on now to Rodney Bahner from FEMA Virginia's presentation.
Excellent. Yes, so thank you for the introduction. Again, my name is Rodney Bahner. I'm a community planner with with FEMA Region 3, and I'm specifically work out of the Virginia FEMA Integration Team office, which is embedded with the Virginia Department of Emergency Management in Richmond, Virginia. And I'm just going to be briefly talking about climate change in hazard mitigation planning, primarily the regulations. This is similar to a presentation I did for the spring webinar. So it'll be pretty brief. Just as an introduction, what is hazard mitigation planning? Some background here. Hazard mitigation overall is the sustained sustained action taken to reduce or eliminate the long-term risks to life and property from natural hazard events. So the typical hazard mitigation plan usually consists of these four components: the planning process, so putting together the team, doing community outreach, doing research, understanding historic occurrences. Then we get into our risk assessment. So again, looking at what are the risks that our communities are facing, and then we get into the mitigation strategy. So how can we look at mitigating the risk to our assets? And then an important part of our plan is actually putting these plans into use, implementing them, keeping them up to date, and adopting and showing our politically that we're on board for continuing these actions. Within the terms of FEMA hazard mitigation planning, the Disaster Mitigation Act amended the Stafford Act, which created the framework for what we have now. This happened in about 2001. This established hazard mitigation planning. Before this, hazard mitigation planning happened somewhat sporadically. Most emergency management was reaction based. So now we were looking at trying to plan and mitigate in advance. The regulations, the federal code requires that we have hazard mitigation plans for many different types of grant programs that are listed here. And then what's most applicable to today's webinar topic is the updated local planning policy that was effective in 2023. So like I said, going back, the Stafford Act established mitigation planning around the early 2000s. So at this point, we're seeing some communities coming in with their third or fourth iteration of an update. Hazard mitigation planning plans have to be updated every 5 years per the federal regulations. And as of this most recent policy update, need to explicitly address climate change and the potential effects of climate change and other future conditions in their risk assessment, and ideally throughout the mitigation planning document and planning process. This new updated planning policy also connects mitigation planning with community resilience and aligns with our FEMA strategic plan, and includes other priorities in addition to climate change, as well as promoting an equitable planning process. There are a couple key requirements that focus on future conditions and climate change. I think this one on the slide is the most heavily focused on future events and climate change. So that's why I share it. This is the only particular language from our policy guide that I'll share in the presentation today. But do know that there are other requirements that touch on future conditions and climate change, but I would say this one is the most explicit, and requiring that the plan include the probability of future events for the identified natural hazards or man-made hazards that can affect the planning area, and laying out how this must be addressed. So just to kind of summarize what all of that language meant on the previous screen, what we're really looking at here is the probability of future events, looking at changes in climate and how that's going to impact natural hazard risks, as well as, on the ground changes in development. Sometimes, generally you're thinking in this case of population increases, but this could include areas that are seeing a decrease in population. Where is that new development occurring? Where are, risks changing? So we're also looking at, how climate change is going to affect the hazard type. Is this going to introduce new types of natural hazards? Or in many cases, is it going to change where they occur and the extent? So how severe those occurrences would we expect to see? So where to get started with these? It's obviously, difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen in the future. But what we're looking at here is a best attempt at trying to understand based on the best existing data that's out there. So here are some of those data sources you can look at. One is our in Virginia would be the Commonwealth Hazard Mitigation Plan. That was recently updated and is going through an update as we speak, just to improve that plan. That does a good job of addressing the hazards that we have seen and how those might change in the future. You can look at your local or state climate adaptation plans. Virginia is working on some resiliency plans as we speak. And then there's some great federal resources out there. I will share links to those at the end of this presentation. So we also really want to focus on, we know that there may be more severe weather events. Every area is going to be a little bit different. The other part of this puzzle is what are those natural hazard events going to actually impact? And this is also going to be different everywhere. Everywhere has different types of lifelines, capacity and capabilities, infrastructure. So we want to see a concerted effort to identify particularly where these community assets are most at risk. So listed here are some data sets to help identify these. In Virginia, the Department of Conservation and Recreation has a great online flood mapping tool that has various data layers already available and has the ability to customize layers, and you can bring in your own local building layers, for example. We also have national data sets that are available through the census. The Homeland Infrastructure foundation level data can be useful. This includes some publicly available information and other information you have to create an account to go through. But this can include utilities, communications locations, infrastructure types of those. So there's many resources out there to help get a grasp on what's going on in your community and what we might be expecting in the future. All right, so we've looked at future conditions, and we're identifying our assets. Now we need to look at where that overlaps, and that's where our risk really comes from. So we can start with historical. Where have these events occurred previously? Where have we seen flooding, for example? Where have we seen and experienced landslides or flooding, coastal inundation, and storm surge? We're also going to look at continued exposure. So you can take, for example, floodplain mapping and overlay that with the assets from the previous slide to see where you have exposure. We also have scenario analysis. This is an area that is developing and becoming more approachable. Right now, one of the main tools is HAZUS, which is a scenario analysis tool that was created by FEMA. There are others out there. That's not the only one that is available, but these are, asking yourself, what if this happens, and modeling out the scenarios that we could expect to see. A lot of work going on in these different scenario software programs. They're becoming more readily available and more user-friendly as well. So it's an exciting area and opportunity. Okay, so we've gone through the risk identification. We're trying to understand our community. We're looking at incorporating climate change and understanding future conditions. So the next step, this all will feed into, so what are we going to do about it? How can we address it and continue to incorporate climate change into our mitigation strategies and actions? So here are the 4 primary types of mitigation actions that are out there. These aren't the only. There are certainly actions that would be outside these, but these 4 generally cover the bulk of what we see. So some of these are a little bit more of a carrot and some are more of a stick. Local plans and regulations generally are more regulatory, so trying to control and influence the way that we build or infill or redevelop. Then we can look at structure and infrastructure projects. So these are a great way to continue incorporating and considering future conditions and climate change when we are doing structure and infrastructure projects. So looking at stormwater systems, for example, is a big one. Improving those to convey increased rainfall events. The third is natural systems protection. So this is a big push that FEMA is making, looking at how can we utilize natural systems to, benefit our communities. So looking at preserving wetlands, for example, instead of building and, paving over, increasing impervious surfaces, relying on those natural systems to, and oftentimes they can be a mitigation action for a particular natural hazard, but then they also offer additional benefits to the community. Lastly, and a big one, is education and awareness. So making sure that folks have the awareness of hazards that their house may be, faced with, or their community at large, continuing to keep the whole community involved, bringing those voices to the table that haven't been there before. And it certainly can be a two-way street. The more folks that are involved in hazard mitigation planning, the more folks that are aware of the potential risks and the opportunities to address those risks. So just to summarize, again, there are basic requirements that federal hazard mitigation plans are required to meet if you are using your hazard mitigation plan to meet these FEMA requirements and open up eligibility for grant programs. So, as for example, I included that one slide of the technical policy language. But one thing I want to stress is there are more opportunities to, go above and beyond, incorporating climate and future considerations into the planning process, looking at creative ways to bring in more localized data into your risk assessment, and then really, as we were just talking about, your mitigation strategies. How can you incorporate and consider future conditions and climate change into those strategies? It can be overwhelming knowing where to start. So the next slides, I'm just going to run through. I'm understanding that all the slides will be shared, so these links will be provided to you. One of the a great resource to start with is this climate adaptation planning guide, specifically targeted towards emergency managers. There are a handful of data sources that are out there for addressing climate change and understanding localized conditions and projections. So this is a big list. Most of these are available to the public through your web browser. You don't need to, you're not required to download software like ArcGIS, although these will, most of them for the most part, interface with those. So if that's your preference, that is an option that's available. This is additional guidance, slightly dated, but includes many resources for climate resilience. Looking at the whole community approach. Additionally, we have specific guidance targeted at that. And climate exercises. I saw this popped up on the survey in the beginning. This is an additional guide to understanding the framework and some ideas and brainstorming around, capability and capacity gaps. Additional resources and tools. These are all links that are out there. These are provided on our Region 3 webpage. And a few additional resources just in case. I think I touched on all these already, but added this slide just to be thorough. And then, again, thinking about the whole community approach and bringing other voices to the table, understanding where communities may be particularly vulnerable due to their community attributes. When you're trying to brainstorm a wide swath of approaches, sometimes just getting started and brainstorming potential mitigation actions can be a writer's block there. So there are lots of design concept guidance that are available from a multitude of federal agencies as well, and some more additional resources. So a couple other Region 3 specific, we do have an ongoing webinar series. Right now it's a little bit on hold, but I believe our next one would be January. We have a resilience report newsletter just about projects and best practices that are going on. So these are all available through the slides that will be shared, or just check out our FEMA Region 3 website. Happy to share those. And that was a lot of resources and information. These are difficult, complex topics to dive into. So we stand by the region, the rest of the community planning team, and our Virginia FEMA integration team are happy to help and look forward to assisting with your community's hazard mitigation plans. So thank you.
Thank you, Rodney. This is Annette again. And if folks do have questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A. I know Rodney said he had to go back to on all-day training he was involved with, but we will be addressing questions or comments at the end for both Jeramie and Katie with VDEM. And next we will have Katie coming in from VDEM to talk about kind of an extension of what you can expect in terms of federal funding, and with the idea in the background that you have been had in place your updated hazard mitigation plans and other information and data that may be helpful in terms of going forward and looking at funding opportunities. So Katie, please take the screen and go ahead.
Thank you. 1 second and I will share my screen. All right. So last year for FMA funding, FEMA allocated up to $800 million, which went to 3 categories. It's the capability and capacity building, which is also referred to as C&CB. It also went to localized flood risk reduction projects and individual flood mitigation projects. And on the next slides, we will get into more detail on those. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the C&CB projects, those are where you have your mitigation plan projects, your project scoping, any other additional C&CB activities. Also, last year in 2023, FEMA awarded $50,000 per applicant that had at least a $1 million federal share for the project. Next slide, please. For the local, previous slide, there you go. For the localized flood risk reduction projects, this is where you would submit applications for stormwater management, nature-based solutions, floodwater storage, coastal and wetlands restoration and protection. Next slide, please. The individual flood mitigation projects, this is where you see projects for mitigation reconstruction, property acquisition and structural demolition, structural elevation, and then dry flood proofing. Next slide, please. Thank you. Also, with the individual flood mitigation projects, the properties must meet the definition of the severe repetitive loss or repetitive loss definition, which we can take a look at on the next slide. So a repetitive loss is defined as a property that's had 2 claims that equal or exceed 25% of the fair market value of the structure. If it is a severe repetitive loss, that is a property that's had 4 National Flood Insurance Program claims exceeding $5,000, or 2 National Flood Insurance Program claims made with a cumulative amount exceeding the market value of the structure. Next slide, please. Thank you. So usually with FMA, the cost share is a 75% federal and a 25% non-federal. However, there are circumstances where there could be 100% federal or also 90% federal and 10% non-federal. And we can go to the next slide and see more about that. So for the C&CB projects and the localized flood risk reduction projects, that can be funded with up to 90% of the federal cost share if you are in a disadvantaged community or your social vulnerability index, CDC SVI score is not less than 0.5001. And that score is based on the factors below, such as household characteristics, housing types, transportation, and also socioeconomic status. Next slide, please. For individual flood mitigation projects, if the property is a severe repetitive loss, that could be awarded with up to 100% federal cost share. If it is a repetitive loss, then you could be eligible up to 90% federal cost share. And again, properties must participate in the National Flood Insurance Program and meet the definitions of the repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss. Documentation must be provided to support that. Next slide, please. And this, I believe, is where we start for the BRIC overview. Thank you. So this is also a competitive annual grant that's focused on climate resilience and infrastructure. With these applications, you must also have a locally adopted hazard mitigation plan that has a strategy within the plan identifying the proposed project. For BRIC, there is a federal cap of, for each project of $50 million. Next slide, please. The priorities for BRIC is really to incentivize public infrastructure projects, incorporate nature-based solutions. And last year, there was increased funding to applicants that facilitated the adoption and enforcement of the building codes. Next slide, thank you. FY23, you can kind of see hopefully a little bit the breakdown. There was $1 billion made available for BRIC funding, and you can see the uses here for management costs, CNCB activities, hazard mitigation projects, and the building code adoption and enforcement. Next slide. So for CNCB projects, those again would be your hazard mitigation planning, your building code projects, and any project scoping to identify further feasibility of additional projects. Next slide, thank you. Hazard mitigation projects, those are where you'll find the nature-based solutions. So again, we're looking at stream restoration, mitigation reconstruction, flood risk reduction with culverts, basins, property acquisitions and relocations. Next slide. So with BRIC, again, it's like FMA, the federal share would be 75% and the non-federal share would be 25% for the majority of projects. Next slide. So if you are in a community's disaster resilient zone or in a disadvantaged community, the cost share could be a 90% federal and 10% non-federal. Next slide. So because BRIC is a competitive program, there is a qualitative criteria. And hopefully when you receive the slides, it'll be a little bit easier to read here. But there are different points based on climate change, implementation measures, risk reduction. And then it tells you each of the possible points out of that category, along with some details of what those questions look at for the scoring. And then on the next slide, we also have the scoring continued. This is where you get into the population that was impacted due to this project, what type of outreach activities, and any leveraging partners to get this project completed. Next slide, please. So with the technical criteria, there's also scoring for this. So you can see again, up to 40 points for disadvantaged communities. If you were a community that participated in a direct technical assistance from a prior application that is provided through FEMA, there's an additional 10 points that's added for that. If you have adopted codes for the IRC and IBC model, there's 5 to 20 points available for that. And then incorporating nature-based solutions, it's 5 to 15 points. And infrastructure, you get 15 points. Next slide, please. So here are FEMA's community lifelines. You can take a look at those when the slides are shared. But if you have a project that identifies or addresses at least more than one of these, then that also looks very well on your application. So it's something to think about as you are thinking about projects to submit. Next slide, please. So with BRIC and FMA, a benefit cost analysis is required. Something that recently went into effect is if there's a project that has a total cost of less than $1 million, a full BCA is not required. Instead, what you can do is a streamlined cost effectiveness, which is basically a narrative that will have the qualitative and quantitative data to demonstrate the project's benefits and cost effectiveness. If the project's total cost is greater than $1 million, then the full BCA is still required to validate that effectiveness of the project. And as of March 2023, for acquisitions, the benefit amount for that is $360,000, and the benefit amounts used for elevation and mitigation reconstruction is $228,000. One thing that also recently changed is the discount rate for the BCA. I believe it used to be 7%. I need to check myself on that, but now the rate is 3%. Next slide, please. Thank you. So with the notice of funding opportunity, this is something that we are waiting on FEMA to release. At this time, I don't have information on when that's going to happen. Once it does, we can gather some more information, and VDM will also add that to the website along with this slide and additional presentation. Once FEMA does release that, we can give you a better idea of the due dates that we have on here. Right now, we were listing the pre-applications due to VDM December 13th. This is a tentative date. The full applications due to VDM on February 7th of 2025. And then the state will need to submit applications to FEMA. We do not yet know that date. And then eventually in the summer of 2025 is usually around the time when the project selected or identified for further review would be announced. In a second here, I will put in the chat where you can go to register for an account if you're interested in submitting a pre-application. It is our VDM EM Grants website. And then on the next slide, we should have the team's information. So based on what region you are in, here are your staff contacts. And again, on the final slide here, it has everyone's email. So you do have that contact information. And again, I will put the EM Grants website in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. That was great. This is Annette Oso again. And we would be happy to have some questions from the group, from the attendees here. We do have Katie again from VDM, as well as Jeramie Calandro and Kathy Welker from the headquarters FEMA. So perhaps I'll stop sharing so we can see, can we see everyone? Then we can see the people who are present here. And again, what I'm not able to see is people's video. If we can start that again so we can see folks, that would be helpful. I just wanted to say we were very pleased to be able to bring in the headquarters folks to talk about the National Resilience Guidance, which is a relatively new publication, as they indicated, after some period of process of working with communities, government, and folks around the nation. So we are certainly supportive of the multi-sector and cross-sector approach to working on resilience, and really want to appreciate the fact that the federal government is now speaking in those terms also. So that was our goal, to bring from the kind of high level folks in. Rodney Bahner, of course, working at FEMA at Region 3, and then Katie with VDM, working very directly with localities in our state. So we do have a question here on in the Q&A here. It says, can BRIC funds be used for spread across strategies on individual building projects, or is it only for standalone infrastructure?
So I may need to get an example of that to answer it correctly, but I will say if there is a project that someone is interested in doing, reach out to your locality, because the projects do need to be submitted through the locality as an eligible applicant. At that time, we can kind of discuss it a little bit more. If it's like a project that has other funding streams to it, we need to take a look at that and see exactly what type of work that is needing to be done for that project.
Okay, and overall, I know Debbie Mesmer was from VDEM was mentioning you all are giving kind of guidance workshops on BRIC. Is that right? To help people with
Yes.
how to position their proposals. And will you be posting that, I guess, on your website? Is that correct?
Yep. So today is the first day back in the office from me from being out in the field.
Okay.
So that is my next step, is to get everything posted. So Debbie was able to hold 2 of those webinars for me last week, and they seem to have gone very well. I do plan on some more outreach with that once things kind of calm down a little bit, and especially once FEMA releases the notice of funding opportunity. If everyone could make sure, if you're interested, to go to VDEM's website and sign up for the email notifications, and that way you can get alerted when we start to hold these webinars and such.
Great, that I'm sure that'll be really helpful. All right, we have a couple more questions here. Is there financial assistance for food resilience, sustainability networks that would collaborate with farmers and hunger relief organizations to assist with regions impacted by flooding and hurricanes? So to help with food resilience, I guess they're asking, is FEMA supporting that sort of thing? So I don't know if Katie or maybe Jeramie and Kathy might weigh in too on that.
I'm happy to give a little bit of an answer. I'm not familiar that FEMA provides funding for that type of food. I know there are feeding resources like in disaster, right, from the disaster relief fund. But I would think as far as like resilience and for farmers, some of the other federal agencies, I don't know specifically the programs, but USDA,
Right.
the Economic Development Agency, potentially SBA may have some resources. And so that's, I'm certainly happy to reach out to some of my colleagues in those other agencies and see if we can get a little bit more information about that.
And we actually are going to show up. We have a website, a web page now where we've tried to pull together resource avenues from various agencies and private organizations. And actually, I know Trish just added a whole set of resources from USDA today. So we'll show that link at the end here of our presentation. Let's see. The person who asked the first question is kind of clarifying. They said, if a school is including resilience features, could BRIC funds support that kind of a project? I guess adding resilience features to public buildings, would BRIC support that type of a project?
So, excuse me, I will say that BRIC has been one of the more innovative grant opportunities that we have, and we do see new things come in every year. There is a possibility, but again, without knowing the details of, the work that needs to be done, I don't want to give a yes or no answer, but it's definitely something that we could discuss. And for the one who is asking that question, if you'd like, I can put my email in the chat and then we can follow up and get some details worked out on that if you'd like.
Okay, we appreciate that. Then I guess going forward for the from the National Resilience Guide, I know there's a lot more to be looked at as far as you all's set of resources that you've put together. And I guess one question might be, is there are there going to be funding opportunities for demonstrating kind of the whole of community approach to resilience? Do you see FEMA coming out with something like that, some funding opportunities?
So I'll go first and I'll pass it over to Kathy, who's the expert in this. Right now, the National Resilience Guidance isn't tied to any specific grant program. Whether that is going to change in the future, we're unsure. But we're happy to relay what the state and locals are asking, what our stakeholders are asking up to our leadership. Kathy, do you have anything else?
I will say that we're doing a lot of work internally at FEMA to really integrate the National Resilience Guidance, the principles and concepts into our different programs. And so that will include like looking at how we measure how FEMA programs contribute to building resilience. I think that we'll also be looking at grants. That won't be led by our team, but our role for our team who wrote the National Resilience Guidance is to sort of be a subject matter expert on the National Resilience Guidance as FEMA looks at how to integrate these concepts. But I definitely agree, with Jeramie that as we're talking to partners, whether they're state, local, tribal, territorial, nonprofit, whatever, we're certainly happy to pass along, what we hear, what the needs are and what the gaps are. And so, we encourage people to reach out to us. I know you'll get our email address again, to reach out to us with like ideas for case studies, resources that we can put into that Argonne National Labs Resilience Resource Library. And then just if you want to talk about resilience and your experiences and your thoughts, we're always happy to chat with people. We learn so much from everybody else.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and if there are other questions, I don't see any more in the Q&A here, but so I want to go ahead and share some additional slides on programs that are currently going on in the state, some of which we are involved with, and that are relevant here in terms of other resources. So first, our next Resiliency Academy is November 12th, and that'll look at hazard mitigation tools and resources for designing and updating your hazard mitigation plan. Registration for that is open now. That'll feature the Mid-Atlantic RESA CHAMPS tool, again, for hazard mitigation planning, as well as a guide for going through that process that was developed by a person who has been involved with the U.S. Sustainable Directors Network. And then another speaker will present on and making sure how to include equity and in your planning process. So that's the next Resiliency Academy. We also, very relevant to what, again, this whole topic of disaster preparedness and resiliency, we wanted to highlight that we'll be hosting a webinar this Thursday, October 10th, that's going to look at the case for resilient building design. I'm sorry, and that's, again, the registration is here with the QR code or on our website. And that will have a variety of speakers from national experts, as well as the architects, practicing architects, looking at resilient building design. Next, I wanted to point out that our Resilient Virginia Collaborative Alliance is continuing to work in the inland part of the state, the central western part of the state, and our alliance, again, was formed about a year ago to help create climate-ready communities in the central and western part of the state. We have a number of working groups that are meeting regularly, and again, there's some dates here for the water infrastructure, clean transportation, and agriculture working groups. You can learn more through the QR code. You can also email Brenda Wolf, who's the project coordinator, at rvca@resilientvirginia.org. if you're interested in participating in that. Another program is working with communities to measure energy resilience and identify solutions. And this is the Virginia Energy Resilience Study that's being carried out by the Virginia Energy Office, along with Resilient Virginia and James Madison University's Center for the Advancement of Sustainable Energy. And this will ultimately assist 10 economically challenged communities to determine their energy risks and in the face of disasters, and help these communities in working towards setting up resilience hubs, which will have solar plus storage energy systems. So that's another project that's ongoing. And again, you can find out more about that through the QR code and on our website. So lastly, I did want to point you all to the Hurricane Helene disaster relief resources that we mentioned. And we are continuing to add additional resources. As I said, we just added some that are oriented toward assisting farmers, and it may address some of the question that about the food networks and food relief resources available with assistance through that agency, USDA. So please do check that out on our website. Then I just wanted to finally thank you all again, the speakers, for being involved and folks for attending. And I wanted to note that we are this year celebrating our 10th year of operation as Resilient Virginia. So we do encourage you to help us with carrying on our goal and our mission of accelerating resiliency planning around the Commonwealth for another 10 years, and consider looking at our programs and information on our website, and consider also supporting us through our 10 for 10 years campaign, as well as other means of support, for example, membership and annual sponsorship. So with that, we'll end a little bit early today, and we want to thank you all for participating and hope to see you all at the next Resiliency Academy on November 12th. So have a great afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Resilient Virginia. Congratulations.